Welcome to the Prison Pod, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Hello again. Welcome back to the Prison Pod. We've been super busy lately. I don't even know how to catch up, but the next couple of guests we have are from the Hinda Institute. We're going to start this week's with Abby Rabinowitz, and the next episode will be with Rabbi Scheinman. And we're going to talk about how the Hinda Institute works around people that have been incarcerated, but today we're going to focus on the families. We don't do a lot about families and how the families and children are affected by incarceration and how it affects them within the communities that they live in. So I'm very honored today to have Abby Rabinowitz from the Hinda Institute with us. Good morning, Abby.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I'd like to know what inspired the development of the Hinda Institute's reentry programming.
Well, actually, the Hinda Institute has been around for 45 years. It started with Rabbi Scheinman, and I think you'll be talking more to him. But when he came here as a young rabbi in Illinois, he got lots of calls from people who needed support for their families, particularly Jewish families, because he's a Jewish chaplain in Illinois. And when he did it, he resolved that this was his calling, that there would never, ever be another person who was trapped alone in a prison environment who did not have support. And he ended up traveling alone at that time, thousands and thousands of miles. As you know, the correctional institutions are all over Illinois. Every month, to make sure he visited any person who called out to him, Jewish or non-Jewish. And eventually, he became the Jewish chaplain here in Illinois for the correctional institutions, visiting over 27. His sons now are involved so that we have little outposts. And it became officially recognized. And also, he's joined the Jewish Prisoners Association, which eventually morphed into the Hinda group by re-entering, people who are re-entering post-incarceration.
That's wonderful. I really love the work that you're doing. I found out about the Hinda Institute from David Grosky when I had interviewed him, and I had the opportunity to sit in on one of your courses a month and a half or so ago. And I am honored to say that in July I'll be presenting on restorative justice with the Hinda Institute. So I've been quite excited with the relationships that I've made with your group. I'd love you to tell me a little bit about what you actually do as far as your outreach to families and children that are involved with an incarcerated loved one.
So I came into the Hinda Institute about 7 years ago. I basically married the Hinda Institute because I married Rabbi Scheinman. And I went from bureaucrat to advocate very quickly. And the first thing that I was paired up with was, there's a few things that I started working on. The first thing was the families. And I started speaking to the families, and I was just horrified. My heart broke when I saw the impact and the effect of incarceration on essentially innocent families. They were victims of the criminal justice system as well. And people term them the collateral damage of crime. They're not acknowledged in the courts so much. They're not acknowledged anywhere. But their suffering is tremendous. And from there, I met up with one very dynamic family person, and it's mostly women, by the way, because 80 to 90% of people incarcerated are men, and they leave behind women, whether that's mothers, whether that's wives, whether that's children. There's also fathers, but a lot of it is women who are left behind. And we formed the CARES group. And from the CARES group, we started meeting every week, and we started doing some grassroots advocacy and social activities. The other thing I'm involved with is reentry. We always had worked with the families for 45 years. We always had done reentry. But I came from the government. So I turned it, Rabbi Shimon said, I didn't marry you for this. But we also saw the horrific crisis that these people were coming out of during reentry. And then most of our resources now go to casework, 50% for the families and 50% for reentry. And the other thing is I was an educational specialist, so we put in a whole education program, which you were part of. And those are basically what we do. Yeah.
I'm curious, has Hinda put out materials like books or anything for children that are experiencing incarceration? Because I see a huge gap there for that.
There is some books, but that's a really wonderful idea, Valerie. Maybe we should really write a book for children about it. Because our survey, which is following national trends, shows that the parents are experiencing social ostracism, really a lot in our community, but it's even worse for children. Children are experiencing it with their peers and also from their teachers. And they're in situations where they're experiencing depression, left out of events, they're having to hide, as well as the stresses at home. So I do think there is some material out there, but you're right, there isn't really enough to help children who are undergoing these issues, and often coupled with mental health issues in the family or addiction, because people don't realize that they're criminalizing mental health. So a lot of the families begin with mental health issues.
That's a huge point right there, as far as in mental health, people tend to sometimes link in mental illness, and that is not always the case. We all struggle with our mental health at one point or another in life, whether it's stresses in life, a death, a divorce, moving even, is, those things that really affect us. And so with children, I think about with children, and when I was a kid, I can remember my mother saying to me, I don't want you going to their house because they do things differently than we do. And I automatically thought those kids were bad kids because they came from a bad home. And that wasn't the case at all. And so even as a small child, I had that perception of the other. And we got to stop doing that. We are all one people on this earth, and we need to start taking responsibility for each other. And I see that happening less and less all the time. So I would love to see some materials developed, not only for the children that have parents that are incarcerated, but to explain in a children's term what incarceration is, and that it is not something that the family did that caused it, and that people heal from incarceration. That's the other part that we don't add in there. We see the people go to jail and people want them to be behind bars and just forget about them. And that's not what we want at all. As
No.
you know, 90% of everyone in prison is coming home at some time. And we want healed, healthy people coming home to our communities.
Right. I would say that I'd like to tell you a story on this, but a true story that happened. I have a child I've been working with since she was 5 years old. And essentially, her parents have addiction issues, challenges, both of them. So she was being raised by her grandparents. And then the main grandparent who was watching over her passed away. So I had been working with her for a very long time. And just recently, I did a bas mitzvah for her. And, we did it in our synagogue, and we funded it, and I worked with her for free. We did all of that. But Uh, when I spoke with her grandfather, I encouraged him to send her to a better school. So in her school, nobody knows. She's incognito in her school because she's trying to blend in with all the other kids. So for her bas mitzvah, she did not invite any of her friends. She does not invite her friends to her home. She has to continually posture to show that she is like everyone else. And when I asked her what her wish was, she said, I just want to be normal. That's all I want. On top of it, she's dealing with tremendous stresses at home that most children would never have to deal with family. And so, it's multiple trauma upon trauma, right? She had a beautiful bas mitzvah, but only her family came, and her friends are making different types of bas mitzvahs, right? Huge ones with all their friends, and she couldn't do that. She couldn't do that. So I want to really emphasize that there's a huge impact on children, and they're simultaneously very hard to reach because you reach a child through the parent. You can't just work directly with a child. You've got to go through the parents. So it's very hard to get them the therapy and services they need, even through the school systems, even with everyone fighting their hardest to give support for these children. And they report depression, anxiety. We need to break the cycle so that these children aren't traumatized, aren't repeating patterns. And to do that, we need strategies and we need will and determination.
You mentioned repeating patterns, and if a child has a parent who's incarcerated, that increases their chance of being incarcerated by 50%. And if both parents are incarcerated, it could be up to 90%. And that's really scary when you think about that.
Those
Do
cycles
you
can be broken. I see that all the time.
do you have any programs through Hinda that help organize transportation for any of the families that are going to the prisons? Because you mentioned, and I know here in Maine, all of our prison facilities are out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they're 2.5, 3 hour drives. If you're lucky, it could be further.
We don't have an official program for it, but if someone, we respond to need. So if someone calls us and they need transportation, we try to help them. It's a huge commitment. We had one lady who was driving another lady, right? And it's a very huge commitment because it's far, and then sometimes you get there and you can't get in, right? So, but we do have some, especially older families, but the other ones do that, do the visitation, or they don't. The ones that do the visitation, the cost is tremendous because they're working, they might have children at home, other children, or other responsibilities. And then on top of it, if you're taking an airplane to the middle of nowhere, or renting a car, or putting a hotel night because you have to stay somewhere, right? That's a lot of cost for a family who's already under financial stress. So it is a huge issue, especially given that communication is so difficult with their family in prison, as is. So it really isn't. It isn't great for the healing process. It breaks up the connection with parents, with their children, with their spouses. They come out alienated. And 80% often the wives divorce them when they're out. So keeping that connection is really important, and the visits are really important. So
You make a comment about visits. I would like to see more facilities have family rooms where a father can visit or a mother can visit with their children without it being in a visit room, because I found that a lot of the men that I had worked with, they don't want their little girls and their little boys in a visit room where there may be people that are in there for sex offenses. So they don't want their children exposed in any way to that, along with the actual prison experience of bringing a child into the prison. If they had a family room that they don't go into the bowels of the facility, where it's set at the beginning of the prison, where they can go in with his toys and coloring books and games. And I do think some prisons are doing that, but I think it could be done a lot more.
Right? They're doing it a lot for the women, and I think we need to recognize that males also have a role in the family, and it's very critical. But even then, they're not doing it a lot for anybody. I think that's really important. I don't think there's a danger for the children, but I do think there's a psychological effect. I mean, let's say you're a woman coming into a male prison. If you come into a general meeting room, are you in a place of danger? Probably not. There's guards around. There's needs to be time and process. Um, I mean, I'm not saying there's no danger, but I don't think that's the real issue. I think the issue is you need to provide an environment where the families can bond and reconnect, even when they are away from their families for long periods of time, so they maintain a connection, because that is part of breaking the cycle for children, and that is critical to the healing of people who are coming out and are currently incarcerated.
I was really lucky this past season. One of the gentlemen that I work with in North Carolina did a piece on maintaining relationships with your child while you're in prison. And his son was 3 when he went in, and he's 17 now. And he really did an encouraging talk. And I actually used artificial intelligence for the voice, so it's not his voice, but he did a great piece on that. And I want to encourage the people that are listening that it's never too late to try to build those bonds with your children. If there's been a big gap there, talk to your counselors in the facility and ask for guidance, or reach out to groups like Hinda and ask them, how do I go about rebuilding this bond and keeping it? Because that's the thing is, once you've made that connection and that connection is built again, you want to maintain it. You know,
Right. And I think also we just have a story of somebody who came out after many years, and he reconnected with his children, and he saw his dream come true. He danced at his daughter's wedding. The children came back and reconnected with him, because we need to remember that no matter where you are always a parent. You are always their parent. And when you remember your role has not been broken, that role is still there, then you'll find ways of connecting.
so I'm going to ask you a personal question, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But I'm curious how you ended up working with an incarceration population. If you had any experience yourself with family members or friends who may have been in prison.
The answer is no. Um, I make a joke that I went from cops to robbers, because in Canada I was working with the RCMP, which is like the FBI. I was doing training in the police as my last position in the government. And but I always was a social advocate. I always worked with groups, mainly children and seniors. And I came here totally naive. In fact, when I was going out with Rabbi Shimon, I said, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not sure. I'll do this, but not this. I'll work with this group, but not that group. And he said, Abby, we don't call them offenders. We call them our clients. We call them our family. And and I said, okay, so they're coming to my table. And I was so astounded by the humanity and of these people. And the honest truth is they're some of the best people I've ever met. Because most of us go through in life and we never regret anything we do. We never have humility for what we've done. We never try to repair our lives, rebuild our lives. We never fight in the same way to um, to change our lives for good, right? In both senses of the word. And these are people that have fought that fought. And in many ways, I'd like to say something by the Lubavitch Rebbe, who was one of the instigators of our organization, because in the 80s he sent his emissaries out to hospitals, mental health homes, and prisons. He said nobody should be left behind, and he sent them out. And he said that everybody can be elevated. Even our misdeeds are an essential part of our life story and need to be harnessed for the greater good. And the fact that people are incarcerated means that these people have a very important mission from God that is extraordinary, or God would not have put them in that situation. And because they're in an exile within an exile. And therefore, they need to remember that they have opportunities and a mission as well. And they have a second chance. And they need to remember that they're human beings with a second chance. So that inspired me. When I started working with these people, I believed in second chances. I saw these people work to rebuild their lives. I saw their struggles, but I saw that there was an opportunity for rebuilding.
Human beings. That is a huge phrase. People in prison, not prisoners. There are human beings behind those walls.
Right.
And that's one thing we need to keep in mind.
They've made mistakes. It is true. Many people have made mistakes, although I'd have to say more than 90% of people in the criminal justice system are pleading guilty. So once they plead guilty, they get extraordinary sentences, which are sometimes not commensurate with what they've done. But they often have made mistakes, or more than that, they've been fighting mental health issues or addiction issues or trauma issues without any help. And we're not giving them that help in prison. And so they're coming out needing that help. And so I think that inspired me. I know that I never was incarcerated myself. Most people have encountered somebody incarcerated, but it was never in my radar. It was never in my radar. But once I met these people, you need people like me who also have never encountered incarceration, who've never been inside a prison before this. All of a sudden coming to the realization, what is really happening in America? What is happening in our prisons? I mean, what are our moral obligations when we put someone away? What are our obligations for health care? Sometimes we're doing worse than the people who are incarcerated ourselves. And we have a moral and ethical obligation to know what's happening. So I'm happy to represent that population who was a mother with 5 kids, who was disconnected with all this, to all of a sudden understand, no, you can't close your eyes. This is happening. And we all need to be involved and to vote accordingly and to put pressure accordingly.
I found with a lot of people that I've worked with over the years that, because I get some of them before they ever get into prison. So when they're first arrested, I go through the court thing, or I used to. I don't still do that, but I used to go through the court and lawyer meetings and all of that. And I found that the ones that were struggling with their mental health, once they were on medication and speaking to counselors or psychologists, they started to level out and became the way they should have been in society had their issues been addressed before. So then they become a normal person and who can regulate their emotions and their actions, but they have 25-year sentence for something they did 4 or 5 years before. And that's sad. And that's where we need to take time to really look at our brothers and sisters out here on the street, the ones that are struggling, and help them before they get into prison.
Right.
Because we want to
That
empty
is
the prisons.
so
We don't want to
essential.
fill them.
I would say there's a systemic gap in mental health all over America. I know for sure in Illinois. Really horrible systemic gaps. When they closed the mental health institutions in the 80s, they never replaced them. And we need to understand that these people are on the streets. They are homeless and there are no places for them to go. And and Sheriff Dart himself calls Cook County Jail the largest mental health institution in America or in Illinois. I can't remember which. And he says 40%, I think way higher, of people with mental health issues. So that could even be for minor things. Like it's gotten better, but somebody's yelling on the street. Well, they call the police. They have nowhere to put them. So they incarcerate them, sometimes for a long time, without them even getting to trial. And so there's a shortage of I think there's 18 million people who need mental health institutions, and there are none for them. So, and also they hit the hospitals, they're in and they're out. There's no real solution to people who have ongoing psychotic disorders, for example. With medication, they're often regulated, but nobody wants to take them in. There's no place to go. There's a shortage of places. Sometimes the Smurfs aren't sufficient. And there's also regulation, which is good, which tries to protect their rights to decide their own medications, which have side effects. But what that means is they end up homeless on the streets. And then they get into trouble, and then they're incarcerated. So essentially, we're incarcerating our mentally ill. I'd like to tell you a story about this. I have a client now who's calling me today, whose daughter is a wonderful person. I'd like to tell you two stories. But if she's not medicated, she's psychotic, and she's on the streets. She's on the streets. And so the mother did something, restraining order or something, so that her daughter would become incarcerated because she had nowhere to put her, hoping that if she went through the system, which was months in Cook County Jail, which is like a Holocaust concentration camp, to be honest, to get her into Elgin, to get her finally medicated. And now she's being released without an exit strategy once again. So another story, we have a mother her daughter had mental health issues. She was doing her MA in university, a good family, everything was good, but she ended up texting somebody inappropriately, constantly. So the person called the police, and they decided this could be a felony. It's harassment. I mean, he could have just blocked her calls, right? They put her in for 18 months in Cook County Jail, and she ended up with PTSD. She was scared to sleep at night, that she would be raped. It was such a horrific experience for her that she can't even talk about it now. And she ended up getting poorly medicated, but she was medicated. She found herself again, and they released her. They decided, oh, you're not guilty. You're fine. They just released her without an exit strategy. Fortunately, her mother was a nurse. She took her right away to the hospital, got her medications. So Cook County Jail is not a place for dealing with mental health. And she could have been diverted. And more, I think the police and Illinois is recognizing we need diversion programs, because if the police had somewhere to put these people, to take these people, they would do it. They would do it, but they have nowhere else to go. I even had an interesting incident. I hope I'm not saying too much. One time a guy said, I feel suicidal, I'm not feeling well, and the police picked him up. We had to call the police because it was a suicide thing. Police came, and he said, I'm feeling better now. I got my medication. He was an addict. He got his Suboxone. And they said, where should we take you? He said, take them to Abby's house. I said to my husband, you better come home. And why? Because there was nowhere else for them to take him. And I said, do not take him to prison. Do not threaten him. There's just nowhere else for these people to go. So I think that's really important to know.
Yeah, here in Maine, we have one hospital that's like a crisis hospital for people that have already been in trouble with the law, that can't, they're either haven't gone to trial yet, or they're in prison and they can't handle them there, so they put them in. But that's not the answer either. There needs to be a safe space That's what I would like to see. Safe space housing where people that are really in crisis have some place to go. And if they're on the street, what are their choices? I mean, if you're already fighting with depression and you're off your medication, how do you survive on the street? I mean, it's we need to do something different in this country as
It
far
is a
as that
public
goes.
safety issue. We need to recognize that we're all interconnected, that by not helping the most powerless and um, most, I'm trying to find the word, most vulnerable people in our population, we've created a housing crisis, a homelessness crisis, and a safety crisis. It is about public safety. It is about, we're all interconnected with each other. And if we don't look at these, complexify these issues, and find real solutions by looking them in the face, then we're ruining our own society in many, many ways. If we can't take care of our most vulnerable, that is, Gandhi said, that is a litmus test of a kind society, that we are able to help the most vulnerable. And yeah.
I often wonder what other countries think when they see some of the reports from the United States. You know, they look at us as this beautiful utopia here, and if they dig deep and start looking into some of the documentaries on our homelessness in this country or the drug addiction, our gun problem. There's a lot of things we need to address that would reduce our prison populations if we would address some of our societal issues.
Yeah, I think this is my opinion, and you don't have to, coming from Canada, and maybe it's also happening all over the world, there's a tremendous amount of polarization and a tremendous amount of rhetoric. These are the good guys, these are the bad guys, I'm good, I help the good guys. And we're just failing to actually be able to examine issues together. And without examining issues, we're not identifying the real problems, and we're not able to find solutions. We're just not able to find those solutions because we're hiding behind lots of rhetoric. And maybe we need to complexify, like say, okay, who's being incarcerated? Well, we have a problem with mental illness. We have a problem with addiction in America, right? What are we doing to strengthen our families, our values, our social support systems? Why is there such poverty in America? What is causing these problems? And maybe there are some bad guys that need to be locked away. I get it. But the majority of people really don't need to be put in these institutions that we can no longer afford. We can't afford to maintain our prisons, and we can't afford to maintain them in a humane way. We don't have enough staff. So we've got to do something about this. We've got to find other solutions by doing a real examination of what works.
You mentioned poverty, and people look at people who are poor as being bad. They don't think about how much white collar crime goes on in this world. They always look at the ones that are suffering. And I think that we need to relook at removing children from the home. When there is imminent danger, yes, most definitely. But I believe that if we put the support services into the home rather than taking the child out, like we do with foster care parents get paid much more than a mother on welfare. And they have more resources. If those families had those resources, even if it was 6 months or a year to get on their feet, to have some financial stability, as you know, that relieves so many other stresses. I mean, poverty is one of the most stressful things a person can go through. The most horrible feeling in the world is not to know where that diaper is going to come from for your baby, where the next bottle is going to be, if you're going to have a roof over your head the next day. Those are things that need to be also addressed. There's a lot of unfairness of wealth in this country. This 1% should not exist. I believe in sharing the wealth.
80% of our clients are beneath the poverty line. 50% of our families, even if they weren't beneath the poverty line before, are now beneath the poverty line because of the costs of incarceration. That is the cost of court, the cost of visitation that we talked about, their inability to find employment. There's ostracism, even for the families, in terms of finding employment. So what does that mean? They're on Medicaid, and 50% can't find services on Medicaid for therapy. So that means they're not getting the services they need. They're not getting psychiatrists. There's a shortage of counselors and psychiatrists because they're on Medicaid. They're accessing systems. They don't have support systems left in America. They have very little. They have food. There is a good food support system with Link and SNAP, but what do they do if they can't afford housing? There's housing crises now in Illinois. So what happens to those children and those families? And if they're in a shelter, they're going from one shelter to another. They can't stay overnight. So we've put people in poverty in situations where they cannot recuperate. They cannot get therapy. They cannot get medical help. They have food. They do have food. But even then, if they don't have a place to live, it's hard for them to access the food. How do they pay their rent? The rents are skyrocketing. So we've thrown these people into situations where they can't pull themselves out. They have no way of pulling themselves out. Even more in the Hinda Institute, our people are older. They might have been incarcerated for longer periods of time. They have no tech skills. They can't find jobs. Who will hire them? And so they end up in this endless cycle of poverty and shame. And then what happens, right?
Well, I recently heard that almost every state, if you're a felon, you can't go to a nursing home. What happens then?
Yes, we
So we
deal with
have
that
all these,
issue. Oh my gosh.
and we have such an elderly, it's really something because there's been a lot about compassionate release with the elders. And I have heard several speak on this, and they say it is not a compassionate release because they have no family left. They have all their friends have died. They have no place to go, and they're going to be homeless and be a senior. And that's a sad situation.
We really have that issue now. We're dealing with it kind of quietly, client by client here in Illinois. And it's not just the nursing homes that won't take them, especially with certain types of offenses, right? They're no danger to anybody in a nursing home, but they have nowhere to go. So they have to try to get services at home, which can be expensive, which cannot be available. Sometimes they're 80 years old. I mean, what threat are they really to society? Everyone, I mean, or they have dementia, and they just have nowhere to go. They just have nowhere to go. And because the nursing homes have liability issues. So it's easier for them, or they have such stringent policies that people can't get in. So it's easier for them to take that road and say, we don't want to deal with it. We have too many issues. And so these people are being left out. There's no incentive for them to take them. And often they're not dangerous, really, right? If you had a crime when you were 18 and now you're 80 years old and you have dementia and you're not, you're having a walker, right? Like you're not a gang member anymore, right? Like it's a ridiculous thing that they're doing. And basically, once again, we're abandoning people in their old age, often after horrible health care within the prisons, right? So they really are coming out with issues.
Oh, goodness, we've covered so many things. So we've covered all these depressing issues, but not really, because we need to have these conversations to make a change, right? I want to know now, what is your favorite part of doing your work?
It's a hard job. I sometimes at night I have nightmares, like I'm disturbed by things, particularly if it's families or children, right? But in the end, there are moments that we see miracles. we see impact. And actually, do you mind if I plug my event, Valerie? This Sunday, we have an event called Everyone Deserves a Second Chance. And we see miracle stories. It's on May 18th. And Sammy Horowitz, who went from solitary confinement at 18 to long prison to being a Hollywood star, a stuntman, a screenwriter, marriage, reliving his life, right? And so it's those second chances, it's those sometimes miracles that we see at the Hinda Institute, and we know that those miracles happen because of us and our hard work, our hard casework. And that, for me, is the payback, is that we're making an impact on people's lives.
That's really great. Well, I had an experience on Mother's Day that really touched me. I had 7 Mother's Day messages from prisons across the country. And one of them said, "Dear Miss Val, I don't know if you have children of your own, but I want you to know you're a mother to many." And I cried my eyes out. It touched me so much. And this came from somebody on death row. So don't tell me there's not human beings in our prisons, because, you know, there's a lot of kind words. There have been so many times when I've woken up in the morning and just not felt right, and I get this beautiful message from a prison. Somebody who's doing their whole entire life in prison, and they have hope, and they have faith, and they want to share it with others. And so we need to keep that in mind, that just because somebody ends up in prison, it is not a sign of who they are as a human being. What brought them there could have happened in 1 second. It could have been 1 second of their life, and that moment defines them for eternity. And we need to stop that.
Yeah, right. One moment should not define a whole life. I'll tell you, Val, something secret is that this month I felt very, a little down. A little down. We were running short of resources for our people. I was worried that Medicaid was going to be cut. And I said, why am I sitting here watching this catastrophe happening before my eyes? And I don't know if I want to see it. And then we did our annual report. And I thought, oh, people are going to say, you're not finding us employment enough, you're not finding us this. And they didn't say that. One person said, every morning I wake up for Hinda and I wake up with Hinda. And I said, what? I found family. And when I heard that, I also teared up, Valerie. And I thought, you know what? We are making a difference. We're small, but we're mighty. And each of us as human beings, by, breaking stereotypes, by reaching out to other human beings, just by saying hello in a kind way, can make a difference in another person's life. And the impact can be forever, really. So we need to remember that, I think.
Thank you so much. That was really well said. Well, I can't believe it. We've actually talked for 45 minutes.
Okay.
And I think it's probably time to wrap things up, but I want to know, is there anything else that you would like to say? Oh, I do want to ask you one thing. Could you talk a little bit about the courses that Hinder does and how people can find out about those and participate?
Oh, okay. So one of the first things I did, because I'm an educational specialist, was set up a reentry program and a reentry education program. And we started off with 3 people, and we're hitting an average of about 20, 25 people, probably 95 individual people are attending our reentry education courses. And courses are a little different than support groups because they give information. There's a different kind of growth there, although there's a lot of sharing because they're very interactive. And so we run courses every month now. Some of them are psychoeducational subjects like post-incarceration syndrome or how to improve your communication for survivors of the criminal justice system, or with your family, for example. Some of them are practical courses like your legal rights, or tell your story, how to get a job. How do you give a job interview when you have history? So they're all different kinds of courses on different subjects. Some of them are, can I ever find redemption for myself? How do I forgive myself? And every month there's a different course. They're taught by two people, an expert in the field like a professor, and one of our own people co-facilitate. So they bring in credibility and realism, and then the professor or the expert brings in the expertise. And it makes a really dynamic dialogue, because the people in the room have wisdom as well. And so it creates an amazing synergy. And I'm hoping that when you come in, Valerie, we'll also have like a panel, which is the first time we're trying it, with people talking about restorative justice from multiple perspectives. And it's that kind of dialogue that I think helps us to come to real solutions.
That's great. And I want to let people know, if you want to find out more about the Hinda Institute, their website is hindahelps.com, and it's HINDA, hindahelps.com. And they have a wonderful website. I've been on there, and the resources are incredible. So definitely check out the website. Check out what Hinda's doing. If you can support the work, they are always in need of donations, like so many of us out here that are struggling to do this work around mass incarceration. And again, thank you so much, Abby, for joining us today.
Thank you for everything you do, Valerie. Your kind heart and your generosity and your compassion.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473.